Millions of despairing men, women, and children, victims of a system that makes men torture and imprison innocent.
You cannot shake hands with a clenched fist.
Would be carried by wind and water and soil and sea to the far corners of the kingdom of God.
As one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
We're not saying that planet Earth is coming to an end. We're saying that planet Earth is about to be refurbished, spaded under, and have another chance to serve as a garden for another civilization.
Most of the people out here are just your reflections. They're your mistakes.
1776 will commence again if you try to take our firearms.
1 million of the planet's 8 million species are threatened.
You are what you repeatedly do. Therefore, excellence ought to be a habit, not an act.
Your lives and the credibility of the United Nations is at stake.
Epstein didn't kill himself.
The reason this is such an interesting time is not only because we're on the threshold of the end of this civilization.
They're trying to take you out with bullshit.
The experience of the past 2 years has proven beyond doubt that no nation can appease the Nazis.
Those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed. The bitterness of men fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die. And the power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish.
In the language of the U.S. Department of Defense, these are unidentified aerial phenomena.
Roswell is a very interesting place. A lot of people would like to know what's going on. There is very compelling evidence that we may not be alone.
This is the Garden of Doom.
Welcome, everyone, into Garden of Doom. In this episode, we're traveling to the West Coast with a very experienced researcher, and he's got a podcast himself. We're going to say that he's in the field right now, and the gentleman I'm referring to is Robert Bitto. He is the host and the proprietor of the website Mexico Unexplained. It is also a podcast, as I said. Mexico Unexplained explores the magic, the mysteries, and the miracles of Mexico. The topics range from ancient mysteries to myths and legends to strange anomalies and religious curiosities. Sounds like this show a lot, except not limited to Mexico or covering Mexico. We also look into bizarre history, legendary creatures, and otherworldly phenomena. The podcast's purpose is to provide information, not confirmation or affirmation. We will present what we have researched, or they will present what they have researched, and it is up to the listener to come to his or her own conclusions to research the topics further. Robert Bitto has over 30 years' experience in Mexico as a student, as an employee for a large multinational corporation. He's also an owner of an imports business called Sueños Latin American Imports since 1999. He was a professional researcher by trade between 1990 and 1993. In addition to his MBA and BBA, he holds an MA in Latin American Studies from the University of New Mexico, and he's published 2 books, Mexico Unexplained and Mexican Monsters. So first of all, thank you so much, Robert, for joining us on the show. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me today, Jeff.
I'm really excited to have you on the show. When I saw your... So just so the audience knows a little bit, I said yes to a solicitation for something that I had never heard of before, and it's something called podcastguest.com. And it didn't cost anything, and I looked at it, and, you could solicit guests and things like that. And I sent out 3 solicitations. 2 out of the 3 responded, and one of them is booked, and one of them will be booked in the future. The third didn't respond to me. I'm like, that's pretty good odds. And then they made me sign something saying, I promise I won't charge the people to be on my show, and I won't accept payment for them being on the show. I'm like, I don't know how they make money, but yeah, I wasn't planning to do either of those things. So cool. And then they offer you another opportunity, again, no money, where they'll promote your podcast in a website, and they will sort of put it out there to guests who want to be on your show. I'm like, that sounds good. Maybe I'll, who knows? Maybe somebody will answer. They sent me a spreadsheet a few days later with 46 people, which That's awesome. That's like a show worth of content if I want that. So thank you, podcastguest.com. You're free, but you're actually worth something, which is amazing. You over-deliver. In that, obviously, I can't talk to 46 people right away, so I picked the first 5. And Robert was one of them because I thought this was so interesting, and I love geographically focused podcasts. And I've had guests from Brazil and other places as well, but there's so much going on, and his website's amazing. It's talking about UFO encounters, it's talking about legends, lost cities, cryptids. There's 2 different kinds of Bigfoots, at least that I saw listed on there. So I'm going to shut up now and let Robert perfect his introduction, his biography, and improve upon what I did. Welcome to the show, and please tell everybody who you are.
Well, you did a great job introducing me. I've had a lot of experience in Mexico due to the business that I own. I started it in 1999. I import arts and crafts primarily from Mexico and other countries in South America. And what that does, what it affords me to do, is to travel around the country. And while I travel around the country to buy my merchandise, I have come across many different things, from legends to stories about UFOs and creatures and things like that. And I realized when I was on a plane, and it must have been like 15 years ago, I was on a plane and I had in my hand, I was nestling into my seat, a magazine called Muy Interesante, which in Spanish means very interesting. And it's a paranormal magazine, a print magazine in Mexico. And I was getting comfortable in my airline seat, and I was flipping through the pages, and I saw pictures of crop circles. And I was like, hey, I haven't ever seen these in the United States before, these specific pictures. And there was analysis in Spanish, from Mexican scientists. And then I was thinking, there's a lot of stuff in Mexico that never leaves Mexico, or sometimes never even leaves the region of Mexico, that where the thing is happening, or where the legend is, or whatever. And so I thought, well, why don't I try to bring all of these things that I'm seeing and stumbling across out to the English-speaking world? And so that's where Mexico Unexplained came from. It's a byproduct of my business, my imports business.
That's amazing. That I mean, what a great way to, put your hobby and your business together and then turn it into something bigger. And when we mostly emailed before about what we wanted to cover, and I, sort of vaguely said, well, let's sort of talk about creation or major myths. Then let's go into UFOs and then some of the major monsters, because we can't possibly do justice to everything that you cover on your website. And that's, readily apparent in the first line where it says you have a podcast. So obviously you've got content, for hours and hours and hours on this stuff. But I mean, does that sound like a fair enough place to start? So, with some major sort of creation origin myths of the peoples of Mexico, and sort of go from there?
Yeah, we can do whatever you want to talk about. I can go on for hours and hours and hours, and I know we're limited to time, but yeah, we can bounce around and do whatever you want to look at, we can talk about.
Well, we are limited to time to an extent, but we're not crushingly limited to time, but we're not limited to the amount of shows. So, hopefully, if there's other things to cover and we get along just fine, and so far we are, you'll come back. If you don't feel like you're giving away too much of your own content, obviously we want to promote your show as well. So we don't get into too much deep dive of particular things. But yeah, let's start with, listen, I know that there's, you think of Mexico, obviously you have the Spanish conquerors, there's the Maya, there's the Aztecs, you have the Olmecs, the Toltecs, there's probably dozens, if not hundreds of other tribes, clans. As I understand that the Aztecs it was not one tribe, it was sort of a confederation. I also know that, I've heard two things. The Aztec is one of the names of the clans or tribes in that, or it was like an acronym, a name put upon them, that they were actually the them as Chica, and that's where Mexico comes from. I probably pronounced that a little bit wrong. But why don't we start maybe with what should we know about the origin of Mexico and its peoples and some of the major origin myths tied to those peoples? I mean, everyone's heard of Quetzalcoatl. I don't know if they know what that means, but that's probably one that we should touch on as well.
Well, there's a lot of ground to cover there. One important thing to note about, let's say, the creation story. There are several different stories and several different iterations within each tribe, let's say. If you take the Aztecs, for example, which you were 100% correct, that's kind of an umbrella term for Nahua-speaking peoples in the central part of Mexico. And I believe it was given to the people as a name by a German explorer. I think it was von Humboldt who gave the Aztecs their name, the Aztecs. But the Mexica, there were other Nahua-speaking tribes in the central part of Mexico that came together, like you said, as a federation and then spread, the empire got bigger. But as far as creation stories go, all of these little groups, and even within these groups, they had variations in their mythology, in their gods, and in the creation stories. There was an emperor named Huitzilopochtli, and he was named after actually a cryptid, a creature that lived in the lake that surrounded Mexico City, Lake Texcoco, also called an Huitzilopochtli. But this emperor, who ruled from 1486 to 1502, he tried to standardize the Aztec religion, and he tried really hard, but couldn't, because the people still had their beliefs, and there was still, throughout the empire, there was freedom of religion to some extent. He tried to standardize it, but the most accepted creation story for the Aztecs is that we're in the fifth world right now. They call it in Spanish the quinto sol, the fifth sun, because there were 5 different suns, 4 before the one that we're in now. And the sun that we're under now is a bloodthirsty sun, Tonatiuh, who demands hearts. He demands sacrifice and blood to survive. But there were 4 other worlds before this, and some were destroyed by fire, some were destroyed by floods. And whenever the world was destroyed, the people who were living there turned into different animals, like monkeys or macaws or something like that. But we are in the 5th iteration of creation, according to the Aztecs. And the Maya, they had their own stories too. Each group had specific stories of creation. And like with the Aztecs, the Maya had the same sort of thing where they had variations in this creation story. So,
do we know how long each sun lasted, approximately?
Well, some only lasted like 300 years. Some lasted 700. I think there was one into the thousands. So, there was one sun. It was a world ruled over by a female goddess. And the whole idea of gods and goddesses, it's a different concept than what we think of, like the Greek or Roman gods. But there was one sun, one world ruled over by a female deity, and that only lasted 300 and something years. But yeah, there are different time spans.
So the flood myth, when people say there's flood myths all over the world, including in Central America, they're really talking about an extinction event for one of the phases of man, or one of these souls.
Right.
Which is not to say that it's different than the other flood myths, but I mean, since we don't know exactly the time period, it may or may not coincide with the years of the flood myths, and I dare say the years of the flood myths don't necessarily coincide with each other, or the most commonly known one, which would be in the King James Bible, and the other Abrahamic books. So yeah, that's very cool. So at some point, I guess probably the easiest thing to do, because if they want to get the details, they should listen to your podcast. But the easiest thing to do is take this standardized religion that this emperor who was trying to import, which strangely, or ironically enough, was probably right, probably about 40 years before the Spaniards came, and probably would have ruined his plans anyway, even if he had succeeded. But what was the origin story or the creation myth, and who were the main panoply of deities or earths or natural spirits that were in that brand that he was trying to spread and make sense? It's amazing how wherever you are in the world, leaders everywhere know the power of religion, belief, and spirituality. It's like it's in our like Joseph Campbell, Carl Jung kind of DNA that a leader knows you must blend these things to exercise some sort of moral or fearful control over the populace.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And the Aztecs used this, they used religion as a really strong political tool, a lot of propaganda. And back to what you were saying, the creation myths, like who were the main people, who were the main gods? You mentioned one of them, Quetzalcoatl. And in one of the creation myths, he threw his son up to the sky, and his son became the fifth sun that we're in now.
That sounds familiar.
Another version of that, there are two. The emperor tried, like I said, tried to standardize it, but there were two creation stories for the sun that were battling each other that he kind of let just go. The other creation story was the gods gathered in Teotihuacan, the main abandoned city that's northeast of Mexico City right now. And they gathered there, which is the place of the gods. It was built 1,000 years before the Aztecs got to central Mexico. But in this other creation myth, the sun was a god that jumped into a bonfire and then went to the sky. And the god who did that was the god of leprosy and sores. He had sores all over his body, and he wanted to be useful. And so he sacrificed himself in this bonfire and then became the sun. That's another thing. But you can go here and there and everywhere with this. But the main gods of the Aztecs would be Huitzilopochtli. He was the war god, the god of fire. Tlaloc was the rain god. And the two twin pyramids in Mexico City, in Tenochtitlan, which they discovered when they were digging the tunnel for a subway. So it recently, like 50 some odd years ago. The two twin pyramids were to Tlaloc and Huitzilopochtli, the rain god and the fire god. And those were like the big gods there. And they had all these other minor deities. And throughout Mesoamerica, these minor deities were more like aspects, somewhere between the Catholic saints and what we would call spirits and apparitions or elementals in our culture. It's a very interesting way. Like if you felt something, if you were a woman, let's say, and you felt something in your body when your baby kicked, you had an emotional reaction, you're pregnant, that emotional reaction that you feel can be attributed to the goddess of pregnancy, the aspect. It's more of a feeling, going from feelings to outside power, things that happen from, lightning to disasters. And yeah, so it's something very subtle to something very dramatic these gods are responsible for. And like Quetzalcoatl has several different aspects. He is also represented as a Hecate, which is the wind god, who is very important in Mesoamerica. Some Aztec scholars look at that and say that's a separate god. Some people say it's an aspect of him. It's not as well defined as we want to make it in the West. It's kind of hard to understand. It was explained to me by a couple of people who are practicing the old religion and who are down in Mexico, who are, the descendants of these people. So it's not quite what we think, like what we think of as gods or goddesses in the Greek or Roman way.
Right, but it's interesting because the Egyptian and the Indian panoplies, that for two, I'm sure there's others, have the same sort of concept where the same god has different avatars or aspects where they have an entirely different name, entirely different figure, entirely different persona, sometimes a different gender. I think it's a set maybe, or I'm probably wrong. Like sometimes when wanting revenge or is angry, their angel of death Set turns himself, from sort of like a hawk-faced, male into like a lioness or a woman controlling like lions that, kill her. Instead of a flood, they use the lion. In Indian, a lot of times the avatar of Krishna is Vishnu or Vishnu is Krishna. And I wish I remember all of this stuff. I can't, but luckily enough, I've got shows on all these subjects where other people have, and you just go back and listen to them. But it's not unique at all. It's interesting because you never know where people came from the migrations, and what started all this and who got to where. Because even the Greeks have the 5 ages of Greece, which 5 can be a coincidence, but 5 is very magical and very special in Chinese culture as well. And listen, a number is just a number. Maybe they just pick 5 or whatever, but still, I don't know. I just find some of these connections so interesting that at some point there is some root mother culture. And no, I'm not leading to Atlantis or something woo like that. I'm thinking like more like, a campfire in the middle of, what was probably now Chad or something like that. 300,000 years ago or whatever. But anyway, this is your show. I want you to, continue with it. But I do want to know, like, is there like an end of days? Is there a heaven and hell? Are there angels and demons? Like, do we have anything like that?
Well, this sun that we're in, according to the Aztecs, the Quinto Sol, the 5th sun, it will end. And it will be replaced by, another sun, a different existence. But we don't know when. And it's not like the hysteria of the end of the end of the Maya calendar in 2012 and all that stuff. We don't know when the 5th sun is going to end with the Aztecs. But they do have malevolent forces and, forces of good. They have magical creatures, and some of the magical creatures can bleed into the whole cryptid idea. And the world is a mystical place. And to kind of circle back to the different aspects and stuff, I was thinking while you were talking about Set and the Indian gods. In the West, we have something similar to that in the Catholic saints. You take, for example, San Martin de Porres. He was a saint born in Peru, and he was half black and half Spanish, and he worked as a barber. And so he's the patron saint of barbers, he's the patron saint of mixed race people, and he's one of the patron saints of Peru. So he has triple duty. Mm-hmm. And he's represented in different things. Sometimes he has a broom, So it's kind of similar to that. I was thinking that would be the closest thing that we have, because saints do double, triple, quadruple duty in, the Catholic Church.
Well, I'll give you one. I'll give you one that might be better or might be completely worse, and you can tell me. But the Trinity. You got the Father, you got the Son, and you got the Holy Ghost, but they're all one. But they all have different faces and serve somewhat different functions. Interestingly enough, when the Son returned to the Father, he sort of usurped him. It's like, people talk about Jesus, not the Father, which is, well, that's very Greek and Roman. That's even very Marduk. That's very, Babylonian. That's, the Son overtaking the Father, is interesting. I don't know if there's any parallel to that, but I was thinking of the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost sort of are avatars, but it's just so much part of our daily lives, whether you're Catholic or not, or believe in the Trinity or not. So much part of your lives. It's normal. You don't think about it as distinctive, but wars have been fought over these distinctions.
Oh yeah, that's for sure.
So yeah, all right. So sorry. I hope I didn't hijack you.
No, that was fine.
Cool. All right. So I went into cryptids. I know that in my initial order we were going to go with the UFOs, but I think it probably makes sense to take it right from the spirits, the elemental, the deities, into the cryptids, and try to hit some of the major ones, and then like everyone's heard of La Llorona. A lot of people have heard of the Cuco or the Coco, and the Chupacabra and things like that. I don't know where these fit into, if anywhere, into I'll just call them the old religions.
Well, the cryptids that fit into the old religions are very interesting. We have things like the Nawal. It's a shape-shifting creature that's feline and dog-like at the same time. And let's see what else. The Owisut, the emperor, was named after this creature that lived in Lake Texcoco. And some people think that it was a prehistoric, gigantic river otter, that it was a real creature. And that when the Spaniards drained the lake, because the lake surrounding the island on which Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital, was on, the lake would constantly flood the city, and the Spanish city, Mexico City, built on top of the old Aztec city, kept on growing, so they drained Lake Texcoco, and so the habitat went away. So it could have been a relic of a real creature that lived in the lake. Yeah, so, but to go on the more mystical, because we can go mystical for cryptids, and we can go like zoological, because there are some animals that people think are real. But since we started with mystical, we can continue along that line and blend into the reality.
Or we can play a game. You can describe the creature and ask me to guess whether it's mystical or zoological.
Oh, well, okay.
If that's too hard, don't. We don't have to fall into my zany concept just because I'm.
No, that's okay. Well, that it would be hard. That would actually be a kind of difficult game to play. Like, for example, my channel actually exploded this past week because I don't know if you heard what happened with the president of Mexico. He was out hiking and he supposedly saw an aloosh. And an aloosh is a miniature, it's a small humanoid that has magical powers. And he was in the Yucatan in the jungle, and he said that he saw an aloosh in the tree. And so is that a real creature, or is it like Homo florensis, the hobbit creature of Indonesia? Is it something like that, or is that just a magical, fanciful, made-up creature? I don't know.
Well, maybe it's the same. You saw something you didn't understand, but I'm going to go with, at least in the culture as we know it now, I'm going to say mystical.
Okay. Well, some people say, it's interesting what's happened, like with alooshas. For example, in the spring of 2010, Elton John was having a concert near the ruins of Chichen Itza in the Yucatan, and the weather was fine. There was nothing going on. And no hurricanes, no high winds or whatever. But the stage that they had built, in the middle of the night, it was collapsing. And it happened 3 times. And no one could explain it. And then the locals were saying, "Oh, it's because you did not appease the local aloosh You did not appease these little sprites in the forest, these elves, gnomes, whatever you want to say. You didn't do anything. You're not respecting them. You didn't get permission to build this monstrous thing. So then they got in some shamans, some traditional Maya shamans, did the ritual to appease the Alush. They rebuilt the stage, and no problem. Now, Sarah Brightman and Placido Domingo also did the same thing. They built stages, they had concerts near the ruins, but before they built their stages, they appeased the Alushas, and nothing happened. So people believe, they did the right thing, so their stages didn't collapse. But
that's why his name is Placido, because he keeps things placid.
Exactly, very good.
Yeah.
But anyway, so people think it's real. It's really hard to tell.
Well, make no mistake. I'm not saying the mystical things aren't real. I'm just saying whether their origins are more magical or just more, archaeological, anthropological.
Yeah. And you had mentioned at the beginning of the show about 2 Bigfoot creatures, and they're interesting. One is the Sisamite, and it's a skinny version of Bigfoot, and he's very shy, and he lives in the jungle areas, and he goes into Central America. The Maya looked at him as a regular animal, like a deer or a peccary or a macaw or something else who lives in the forest. But they did think that he had magical powers. Okay. And people have cited this creature over many years. The first one to bring it to the English-speaking world was a circus performer from Canada who woke up one morning, he was camping, and woke up and there was a Sisamite at the foot of his bed. But the Sisamite is very shy, very quiet, and that has a history in the Maya archaeological record. Then there is another Bigfoot creature who is more like the North American Bigfoot. He's big and buff and mean and, 7 feet tall and angry. And I was on a show one time and I had, laid out all those adjectives and the guy corrected me. No, the North American Bigfoot is a gentle creature. He's not angry. Okay. So the Cuatlacas, that's the big buff Bigfoot in Mexico. He is an angry, mean guy because he doesn't like humans going into his territory. And most people, when they think of Mexico, they think of Clint Eastwood movies and dusty towns and deserts and things like that. People don't realize that there are 3 mountains in Mexico that have permanent snowpack glaciers. And there's search and rescue teams on these mountains that were trained in Switzerland for high mountain rescue in, blinding snowstorms. And the Sisamite lives on these mountains and in the thick pine forests of northern Puebla, where outsiders first penetrated into this area only in the 1850s. That's how remote these valleys and mountains are. And people don't think of Mexico as pine forests or alpine rescue and glaciers and snowpacks, but that exists. Those exist in Mexico. And that's the habitat of the Cuatlacas. And he's the mean one, and he's huge. And some people who have studied this say that the Cuatlacas is an isolate, because in between these forests and the traditional habitat of the North American Bigfoot, there is like 1,000 miles of desert. So some people who study this very seriously think that this is a population that's just been isolated over time. But it's very interesting to uncover this stuff because a lot of people don't even know about this.
And you're exactly right. You think about Mexico, you think of sort of the good, the bad, and the ugly, or you think about beach resorts. But and you might think of like step pyramids and things like that. But you're not thinking about high mountain ranges. You're not thinking about ski slopes. You're not thinking about pine trees and deciduous forests and whatever. I mean, the jaguars live somewhere; they're not living in the desert. So anyway, that's a very good point. So, is there an equivalent to like a werewolf or something similar?
Well, some actual. It was interesting. I did a show called The Werewolves of Coita, and there was a town in Veracruz that actually they thought was plagued by actual werewolves, and that was in early 2020. And some people were thinking that it was anxiety around the pandemic, when it was happening, and it was a mass hallucination. But that was a sighting in this town of a traditional European-style werewolf. Now, I had mentioned briefly there was a creature called a nawal, a shapeshifter, which is kind of the same thing. I mean, it's a shaman, it's a person who's into magic or whatever, who transforms himself into this snarling, growling creature. And that's the nawal. You can trace that back for thousands and thousands of years in Mexico, the whole concept of that. And that the concept of nawal has been kind of twisted a little bit by Castañeda in his books. He's a Peruvian writer that talks about magical things in Mexico and the Toltecs and Toltec wisdom. And most of his writing is fictional, but some people get confused if they're familiar with his writing, because the nawal is like a different part of yourself. But right. The ancient Mexicans did not think that way. No, it's a specific creature that is a shapeshifter. And there are other shapeshifters too, besides this. But.
He's making the nawal into Jekyll and Hyde, but the traditional thing is more like a skinwalker. You've got the shaman, and if it has the skin of the wolf, it turns into the wolf or the lobo. If it wants to turn into a deer, it turns into a deer. If it wants to turn into a coyote, it turns into a coyote, or maybe a hawk. Which also witches are called to be shapeshifters. So yeah, I mean, more one thing can be more than one mystical creature. That is interesting. I have a question for you on the Toltecs and the Olmecs, because I always get them confused. One thing I think is that they're both older than the Aztecs. One of them was long before and apparently built a lot of stuff that other tribes or peoples stumbled into. I don't know which one it is, but it sounds like the writer you're talking about is calling the Toltecs almost like the Atlantis of Mexico. It's like that's the answer to everything. Like some people say, the Phoenicians. Everything's the Phoenicians. I don't know, but what is the difference, if between the Toltecs and the Olmecs, and where do they fit into our timeline and mythology? In the shortest version possible.
Okay, yeah. I'm glad you qualified that, because I could go on forever and ever and ever. Right. The Olmecs are considered the mother civilization of ancient Mexico, because that's where we start to see, on the Gulf Coast of Mexico, we start to see the growth of settled peoples organizing into civilizations. So,
the Gulf Coast, which Gulf? Are we talking about like the Gulf of California? Are we talking about the Gulf of Mexico on the East Coast for our foreign listeners?
Yeah, sorry about that. The Gulf of Mexico. Yes.
Okay. West Coast.
No, East Coast. I'm sorry. The Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah. No, I'm sorry. I live on the East Coast, for God's sake.
That's okay. So they are considered the mother civilization, and there's a lot that's based on them. And you can see the trajectory, excuse me, the trajectory of evolution from the Olmecs into the Maya, and then other cultures adopted some of what the Olmecs were doing. The Toltecs, now that's an interesting civilization. It's between the collapse of Teotihuacan, which was an empire, a trading empire unto itself, between the collapse of Teotihuacan and the ascendancy of the Aztecs, we have what has been just jumbled together as the Toltec civilization. And No one knows what their language was. They didn't have any writing. They left behind ruins and different pottery styles that are attributed to them. And so it's more like a classification, and it's part of this evolutionary track. But yeah, there's not a whole lot known about them, and they're a blank slate as far as their ideology. We can guess from what they left behind in their iconography what they were believing in, but there was no written record at all, so we're not really sure. We have to make some huge guesses as to what their religion was. So these people who talk about Toltec wisdom, we know nothing. We have no idea what that is. And it's mostly Americans and also Mexicans in Mexico who are filling in the blanks of the Toltecs with spirituality.
Right.
And they're selling it. It's for sale. It's like, come to my Toltec retreat. And, there's a Toltec shaman. There is no Toltec shaman. I mean, we don't know when the Toltec culture, we can't even say it's an empire or anything, or even a collection of city-states. When the Toltec culture collapsed, we don't know what happened to the people. We think that someone here, someone there, but there are no living Toltecs. I mean, by default, if you're Mexican or even Mexican American or whatever, you probably have the blood of those people in your veins. It was 1,000 years ago, but nobody is culturally Toltec today at all.
Right. I mean, yeah. Let's be frank. Most people heard of the Toltecs through the show Legend of the Temple on Nickelodeon with Mike Murphy as the host. So, I mean, but it does sound like it's become, the Atlantis or the Tartaria or, Hyperborea or another Shangri-La, Shambhala, Eden, sort of the root culture of everything good that we've lost, and we've got to get back to the garden kind of thing. To go a little Crosby, Stills, and Nash, and I'm not sure. Anyway, all right. So obviously, my next thing after werewolves is obviously going to be vampires, right? I mean, do you have any pure vampires there?
Well, there's an interesting vampire-like creature called the Tlahuelpuchi. Now, say that 3 times fast,
No,
right?
no.
Tlahuelpuchi. The Tlahuelpuchi exists in the modern-day state of Tlaxcala in Mexico, in central Mexico. Tlaxcala used to be a kingdom that was independent and maintained their independence from the Aztec Empire, even though they were surrounded by the Aztec Empire. But parts of rural Tlaxcala, the state, something interesting was happening in the 1950s. There was a functionary, a government worker, who was poring over death certificates coming from the rural areas in the capital city of Tlaxcala. So this guy was looking at death certificates, and the cause of death for a lot of infants was chupado por la bruja, which means sucked by a witch. And then he went to his boss and said, look, what is this? What is this sucked by a witch as cause of death? And then the boss said, okay, we're going to have to send people to these villages and see what's going on. So then what came to light is this whole myth of a witch called a Tlahuelpuchi. It's a woman. Usually, it's funny, the witches in Mexico, kind of like the witches in the West, are marginalized women. They were made fun of and bullied as little girls or whatever, and then they go to the dark side and they live outside the town or whatever, and they're alone, and they engage in magic and all this stuff for evil. And so Tlahuelpuchi, what she does is she shapeshifts into a fly or a mouse. She makes herself small enough to get into your house, so she'll get in through the keyhole by turning into a fly. then she'll materialize in the baby's room and then suck the blood out of the baby and then leave. And so that was being used as an excuse for crib death on these forms. And that's when this whole myth became known by people outside these villages. And if you were to ask your, garden variety Mexican off the street, do you know what a Tlalopouchi is? They probably won't know unless they're from rural Tlaxcala. And this is what I was talking about at the very beginning of the show, that a lot of this stuff that I'm bringing forth on my show and in my books, it's not in the English-speaking world because it sometimes doesn't even travel outside the region where you find this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I'm wondering about crib death and exsanguination. I mean, there's a they both die in the crib, but it sounds different. So hey, maybe there really was the exsanguination. Maybe they didn't die, and maybe it wasn't regular SIDS. So maybe there is the witch who turns into a tick with with the appetite of a bear or something. All right. So what other cryptids do you want to take us through, which are maybe not tied to anything, but you just think we should know about?
Well, the interesting thing about the cryptids is when I've done shows on some of these, I get the comment sections just wonderful. Comment sections are like gold because people will chime in and they'll say, well, I saw this, or my uncle shot this. And I'm beginning to actually believe in some of this stuff. Like there's one wildcat that they call it the Mexican onza. And I'm inclined to believe that it's a real animal. It could be a remnant of a North American cheetah that supposedly died out with the last ice age. When the Spanish first came to Mexico City, they were welcomed as invited guests by Emperor Montezuma. And for months, they were allowed to roam around the capital and take notes. And some of them even published their letters and books. And one of the marvelous things that they commented about was Montezuma's zoo. And in that zoo, they had a mountain lion, they had a bobcat, and they also had this other strange long-legged cat that had speckles on its legs. And some people believe that was a cheetah, and the North American cheetah that became extinct, which was a real animal at one point on this continent.
Maybe still is.
I'm sorry, what?
Maybe still is.
Yes. And people, I've had people say, oh yeah, my uncle shot one of those in the Sierras or whatever. And there have been a couple of carcasses of these animals that have gone to study, to be studied. And so from what I've seen about this, that could actually be a real creature.
Well, if there's going to be remnants from, before the Ice Age, it's going to be sort of in around the equatorial zone, probably, 1,000 miles north, 1,000 miles south, because the Ice Age didn't get there. The Ice Age was up here. So if the animals were driven south from the northern hemisphere, north from the southern hemisphere, that's sort of where they would end up, sort of, around the Panama Isthmus and a little bit north and a little bit south.
Yeah, and to wrap up this whole onza thing, they call it the Mexican onza. The last I heard, there was a carcass that got sent to a university in Texas for examination, and that was just recently.
Oh,
so,
very cool.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on with that, but yeah, it's all really, really fascinating to me.
Well, let's switch up into the UFOs in Mexico, because that was like the first thing I saw, that UFO stories only in Mexico, and I think that's really cool. UFOs are obviously very hot now with the balloons and what's debris, what's a spy balloon, what's something else, the Tic Tacs, the disclosures from the U.S. military, the British Navy, everyone else, end of days, the end, they're coming to eat us, the reptilians. What do we got there in Mexico?
Well, I know your shows are evergreen, but we are recording this on March 5th.
Right.
And that's
2023.
That's a historic, March 5th is a historic date in Mexico UFO history, because on March 5th, between 5 o'clock and 6 o'clock p.m., which is your time right now, a squadron of Air Force planes intercepted 11 UFOs. Not intercepted, I should say. It appeared on their radar.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a very famous case, and I talk about it in an episode called The Mexican Air Force versus the Flying Saucers. And why this is so historic, and it, like I said, it happened on this very day, in this very time slot in your part of the country. But the Mexican government wanted answers as to what was happening, and they made it public. And this was, most people who study this consider it the very first time that a national government went public with a major UFO sighting asking for help. Totally transparent, released the tapes, released all of this evidence for examination. And the person who they contacted was Jaime Maussan. And he is the grandfather of ufology in Mexico. He's been studying the paranormal. He has a show called Tercer Milenio that is very popular. It's available on YouTube. He's been an investigator for well over 50 years, and they brought him in to try to take a look at these tapes and the radar footage and everything. And they really were inconclusive with this, what it was. There was an American show on cable, I don't know, the Discovery Channel or the History Channel, one of those, who came to debunk this whole encounter, and said that because they were flying over the Gulf of Mexico, it was off the shore of Campeche, where there are a lot of oil platforms, and they claimed on this show that the 11 UFOs were really burning oil platforms, the exhaust on the top of the oil platforms, that they were 11 of them right in a row, and that's what the pilots saw. But if you listen to the cockpit voice recordings, you hear the pilots and the radar operator counting off how many there were, and they were surrounding the plane. They say, abajo, arriba, above, below. You hear them talking about it. So it's not like they're seeing 11 oil fires on platforms down below them that were stationary. These objects.
These are Air Force pilots. They know that they have seen the oil derricks or these giant oil platforms in the Gulf of Mexico before. I mean, they know the difference between saying that it's flying around above or below them versus something that's stationary in the sea. I mean, that sounds silly to me.
Yeah, it is. I mean, and so the reports that came out from this were that it was all inconclusive. They didn't know what this all was. But yeah, the Americans stepped in with their documentary filmmakers, and they tried to debunk it, but it was a pretty pathetic attempt.
Yeah, well, that's what the U stands for, unidentified. Either whether you do FO or AP, whichever abbreviation you want to use. So that's really cool. Do you have like abduction stories and cattle mutilation? By the way, I've never understood the correlation between cattle mutilation and UFOs. I can't imagine why they'd want to do it. Then people say, well, the military did it to cover up. Cover up what? What does killing cattle have to do with a cover up? I don't. Do you have anything like that? And obviously, I'm going off a completely different rail. But is there anything like that in Mexico?
Well, as for the mutilations, those are usually attributed to creatures like the chupacabras or to the nahual or, other creatures, the chaneques, another group of little people who run around and cause mayhem. So in Mexico, they ascribe that sort of thing to creatures. They don't look at it as extraterrestrial.
Well, what are those creatures? Let's the chupacabra is pretty famous, but what's a chupacabra? Is it like a sort of like a fat coyote with a long tail?
Well, yeah, that's been one of the descriptions. There's also another description that it's more lizard-like, and it has scales and like ridges on its back, pointy ridges.
Like a dinosaur.
But, yeah, something like that, a reptilian. But in Mexico, most of the chupacabra sightings have been like dog-like creatures, and or kind of like the dog man almost in North America. But so those mutilations, if they are happening, and these livestock killings, they're usually attributed to these creatures. So whether it's a chaneque or a chupacabra or a nahual.
What's a chaneque? We talked about the chupacabra and our nahual. This will be the third time we've heard about them. But what's the chaneque?
A chaneque is the Aztec version of the aloosh that we talked about earlier. It's a little creature who lives in, on the fringes of the human society, and he causes mischief, and your keys are missing, it's a chaneque. Someone's throwing rocks at your window, it's a chaneque. And you can even call a misbehaving child in Mexico chaneque.
So it's an imp, basically.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. So sometimes they kill creatures too. They kill livestock and stuff too. But the cattle mutilations and things like that, it's not ascribed to UFOs. But to the other part of what you were talking about, you asked about abductions. One of the first abduction tales comes from Mexico, and it was in the 1950s, and his name was Salvador Medina, and he was driving a taxi, and he was stopped by what we would now call the Nordics, and he thought they were gringos. He thought they were, hey, gringo wants a ride. Right. And then, so the gringo, the Nordic guy who spoke perfect Spanish, said, no, I want to give you a ride. And so this taxi driver eventually published a book that is in Spanish, but it was published in Colombia. It wasn't published in Mexico. And the book is called Estuve en el planeta Venus, which means I was on the planet Venus. And in the 50s, as you may know, the planet Venus, we all thought that was inhabited by intelligent life or whatever. And so that was big in the paranormal scene, the planet Venus, and even in sci-fi movies at the time in the 50s. So he supposedly went on this flying saucer, your traditional flying saucer, and went to Venus for a few days. And then they brought him back to his taxi and went off with his life.
Well, just because he thought it was Venus or they told him it was Venus doesn't mean they just could have given misdirection, like the word they understood. It could have been, planet Zibazababa, he doesn't.
He told him Venus because that would be something he could understand.
Right. Usually when I have a straw man for a bad guy country or land, I just use Jeff Zikistan because I'm Jeff. So so the planet Jeff Zikistan.
And then there's another very notable abduction case in Mexico of a teenage girl. And why that's notable And I got a lot of praise when I dropped that show about the Santa Maria Air Force Base. It was a teenage girl who was living there because her father was stationed at this base. And she woke up one night, in the middle of the night, and saw a flying saucer supposedly outside the window. And she walked to it, and then they took her on board. Well, I don't know if it would be considered an abduction because she went willingly.
Right.
But she thought that the people on board this craft spoke accented Spanish. And some people theorized that this was either a U.S. or a Soviet project that somehow she got caught up in. And this, I believe, happened in the late 60s, like 1968 or 1969. And one person contacted me and said that it was the Soviets. And the people she encountered were Eastern Bloc people, like from Czechoslovakia or Poland. And this was part of some sort of Eastern Bloc project that she had stumbled into. But then there are other people who believe that this was a genuine abduction. And she was given, I guess, she was shown what the future would be like and all this other stuff too. So apparently this woman is still alive, and she did give some interviews in the early 80s, but she's not talking anymore. But it was an interesting story, and like I said, people commended me for bringing it forward because you rarely hear about women getting abducted. In a lot of these cases, mostly men. It's not like younger women, But in Mexico,
but that's interesting. That's why I think it's American or Soviet. Like if it's accented in Spanish, why wouldn't you think it was like Portuguese or something?
Yeah, well, yeah, and the thing was that the people on the craft were they tended to look Slavic or Northwestern European, so that was the assumption, I guess.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So more Nordics.
Yeah, more of the Nordics, which is probably the most popular type of alien that is seen in Mexico. It's the Nordics.
While we're on the Nordics, or the description of sort of the traditionally Caucasian, if that's even it's an outdated term, but Caucasian in paranormal, there's a whole school of thought where people are saying that Quetzalcoatl, which I know you pronounced differently, probably correctly, was white. My understanding is that's not true at all. Is that was a painting that was done by the Spaniards afterwards, and like the closest thing to white was that something like he had the shining armor that was silver or something like that, but he was multicolored, feathered, almost like Joseph in Technicolor Dreamcoat, and not Caucasoid at all. But I don't know. Tell me, am I right, or are those folks right?
Well, there's been recent scholarship in the 21st century going back and saying, where did this white bearded god come from?
Right.
And the question that the scholars have been asking is, what was Quetzalcoatl, or Quetzalcoatl, to be a pure Nahuatl speaker, right? Quetzalcoatl, what was he described as before the Spanish arrived? Okay, so he wasn't described as a white person with a beard.
Right.
I mean, like you said, that came after. And maybe that came after so that the medicine would go down easier. As far as, look, 2 generations ago, this is a Spanish person speaking in the late 1500s. 2 generations ago, your ancestors worshipped this bearded white guy. So here we have another one that you can worship. Okay? It's like the Virgin of Guadalupe appearing on a hill dedicated to a goddess Tonantzin. Here we have this other female aspect of the divine that just so happened to appear on this hill. Some people think that that also is something that was made up a few generations after the conquest. But Quetzalcoatl, people believe that he was based on a real person, a real king in Mesoamerica who lived around 1200 AD. But he wasn't, I mean, from what I've seen and the new scholarship that's coming out, which is really, really good because there's a lot of information to look at, it wasn't some bearded white guy who came from across the sea. And, there's a certain religion out there that the certain religion claims that it is Christ who came to the Americas.
Sure.
And I think you might know which group I'm talking about. But so once again, when you have something that's murkily defined, people will put whatever they want on it. And they will ascribe whatever they want on this to whatever this is.
Okay. All right. So, how about some of the major legends you have? I mean, you have sections on haunted places and castles and legends, and I don't know. Just give us like an overview of some of your favorites.
Well, today I just dropped a legends show, so that's fresh in my mind. What I do with my legends is I go geographically. So today I looked at the legends of Aguas Calientes. That is a very small state in north central Mexico. And each region has their own little things. And some of the legends are based on indigenous stories. So they go back possibly thousands of years. And there's so many legends. I mean, the most popular ones, of course, are the Llorona. There's even a Hollywood movie on that. Right. And I thought I saw her when I was a child in New Mexico. And, there are legends like that cross over into all different states of Mexico. But then there's some that are very specific, like today, there's a legend of a pool that's outside the city of Aguas Calientes where this lizard creature, a lizard humanoid, in the UFO lore, you call him a reptilian, right?
Sure.
And he lives in the pond. And in the 1880s, on church records, there was a preponderance of entries that said for the father of the baby, Chan del Agua, which meant this creature who lived in the pond. And supposedly women who were going to bathe in that pond became pregnant from this creature. But what was really happening is, if you don't believe in the legend, is having children out of wedlock in the 1880s in Mexico was a serious thing. So it was better to claim that a creature that you didn't know of, that you didn't have any control of, was the father of this baby that you're carrying.
So it was like a incubus.
Yeah. So what was happening in the 1880s, what I just described, is actually based on an old legend that goes back maybe 1,000 years, connected to this specific pond, that there's this reptilian creature that lives there. So they just twisted that a little bit and adapted it to their 1880s reality in Mexico. But legends are, oh my gosh, there's so many everywhere you go.
All right, so, I'm gonna hit you with 4 things, which might actually be 3 things or might be 2, and some might even be not applicable here. But okay. Thunderbird, Firebird, Rock, Dragon.
Lechuza. Okay, now this is a creature that I think might exist. Okay, what this is, Lechuza is this gigantic owl. that has a wingspan of 15 to 20 feet. And some people think it's similar to all those creatures you just listed, which are kind of variations on each other, right?
Well, maybe.
Gigantic.
No.
Maybe, right? Yeah, exactly. Okay, we don't know for sure. But the lechuza, it could be a real gigantic owl that we don't know about yet, but there is a legend connected with it. Supposedly a witch, once again, a marginalized woman who lives outside of town, right, who wants to get back at people, turns into a gigantic owl and goes around and tries to kill people or to take their dog or their livestock. And you can ward her off by tying 4 knots into a rope and hanging it outside your door and sprinkling salt in front of your door. So that's the way to ward off a lechuza. But the lechuza story is really interesting because that is the cryptid, the one cryptid or legendary creature that has gotten the most response of all of the shows that I've done. And people are sharing their stories with me. I even had someone offer to go on a lechuza hunt with me. And it seems like the habitat of the lechuza is in northern Mexico, the Rio Grande Valley into Texas. The southern Rio Grande Valley is where there's a lot of sightings of this creature.
Are we sure they're not condors?
I
know a condor doesn't look like an owl, but from the neck down, it could be. Condor is more like a giant vulture, but prettier.
Right. Yeah, right. And of course, we have them in California, not a whole lot of them. They're very rare, but so this gigantic owl, and if you shoot one, it supposedly dies and then turns back into the woman, the witch. But so that's a good example of a legend that could possibly be based on a real creature. You take the witch out of it, and you're left with this owl with a 15-foot wingspan. Is it possible? Well, a lot of Mexico is remote. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it's unexplored. A lot of people don't realize that. The northern mountains of Mexico, a creature like this could live there easily and not be detected.
You have like a traditional like serpent, creature, or whether flying or otherwise, where fire breathing dragon or treasure hoarding snake, or or some combination of that, or that just does not exist down there.
No, there is one. There's a guardian snake of the Maya, and I think it's called the Tzulkun, and what it does is it guards the cenotes. And the cenotes are sinkholes where the Maya get their water from, because most of the Yucatan is a limestone shelf, and there's no surface water. So you have to go into these gigantic natural cisterns, natural sinkholes to get water. And they believe that there's a gigantic snake that guards these cenotes.
Is he guarding it from them or for them?
For them.
Okay.
It's a benevolent snake, and when it's about to die, it flies into the ocean. So it has the ability to fly.
Very cool. Very cool. All right, so that's our dragon. Is there any difference between a thunderbird and a firebird?
I have no idea. I mean,
okay.
I think that's more like North American native, right? Like U.S. and Canada.
Probably. I don't really know. I figure that there's always sort of equivalence. And the rock, is that? I only remember the rock because there was a movie called Rock, and then the movie Quetzalcoatl came around the same time, and they look the same.
That's Arabian, right? That's from the Middle East, the rock.
I look into it. I think I conflated the two. I know a rock is just a big bird, basically a big, raptor, basically.
Okay.
All right. Well, that's very cool. So, all right. So, Thunderbird and Firebird more north of the Rio Grande, not south of the Rio Grande. We've got two different kinds of Bigfoots. We've got something close enough to a dragon, or at least a benevolent snake, who I guess would not be benevolent to the enemies of these particular people. And I guess there's some way they can identify themselves, or it just intuits it. We've got our shapeshifters, our witches, possibly the same or different than werewolves. We've got our imp. We've got our chupacabras. We got a whole bunch of things going on. We got UFOs. We got abductions. We got mutilations. It's all there.
Yeah, and you know what? We also have, with the Awisut, we also have like a Loch Ness monster creature.
Oh.
Because people still see this lake monster, this creature, too. And one other thing that we didn't touch on is there's also an equivalent of the Bermuda Triangle in Mexico. It's called the Zone of Silence, the Zono de Silencio. And I could talk about that for a whole hour. But it's a place where there's magnetic anomalies, meteors crash there, there's strange creatures, the cactus there grows really weird, there are different plants that are out of whack and things like that. And there's it's part of a biosphere reserve. And some people believe that NASA has an underground base there and they're conducting experiments and stuff. And how this came, I don't know. It's funny because a lot of things that happen in Mexico, weird stuff, there's always, they blame NASA all the time, more than the CIA. Whenever there's something weird that happens, like that has something to do with the paranormal.
That's a good choice. I'll go Air Force, CIA, NSA, DARPA, maybe.
Yeah, but NASA supposedly has a research, an underground research base there or whatever. And the Zone of Silence became really popular on the internet when a diary surfaced. And I saw this diary. It was a diary of a park ranger who disappeared. And the diary was written in Spanish, but nobody has located this park ranger. His car was left, in front of the building where he was stationed, and his diary supposedly was found, and then it made it to the internet. And that's actually how I found out about the Zone of Silence.
Where is the Zone of Silence? Like, where's it in Mexico?
It's in North Mexico, Chihuahua, Durango. It's a desert area. It's a desert preserve.
Could it be an offshoot of the same meteorite or asteroid that hit Yucatan?
Maybe. Yeah, it's hard to tell. But there's a lot of theories as to what's going on. Some people believe that there's a race of people who are living underneath there, an offshoot of the Maya who are living underground. And they're called the Yellow Maya. I don't know why they're called that, but that they have an underground city there.
Because they got jaundice because they get no sun.
Yeah, I guess. So,
duh.
Right. Yeah. So that's a weird place. And now what's going on there is there are a lot of tours going to this place. Tons and tons of tours. You can take a paranormal tour out to the Zone of Silence.
I want to go there. Even if there's nothing there, if it's quiet, I would still be happy.
Yeah.
That is awesome. That would be amazing. It's almost like the plot of Black Panther 2, except not in the water.
Yeah. So, Mexico has everything as far as an equivalent, it seems like, to all these different things. But like I said, not a whole lot of people know about a lot of this stuff because it never makes it outside of Mexico. Or if it's on the internet, it's in Spanish. It's not in English.
Well, hopefully we've helped you on your journey to change that. Your podcast is called Mexico Unexplained. And, maybe you'll agree to come back on again, especially if we get the technology fixed and figure this out a little bit better. and explore some of the things you want to explore in detail in an organization that you would choose to do without giving away all of your episodes, but maybe like an enticement to listen to the deep dive episodes. But yeah, very cool.
I'd love to come back on again if you'll have me. Yeah, anytime you can reach out to me, and anyone who wants to contact me can go to my website or MexicoUnexplained.com or my YouTube channel. I'm really good at responding to comments there, and reach out to me, and I get a lot of good material from listeners and viewers too. A lot of good tips, so I really do appreciate that coming from the public.
Excellent. So, folks, this is Robert Bitto. He is the host of Mexico Unexplained. As you heard, he's got a YouTube channel as well and the website. So check his stuff out. He also has an MBA and a BBA and an MA. So, he's not just a crank, just like I'm not just a crank. Without rejecting the crank entirely. But he seems less cranky than I do. So this is great. Thank you so much for sharing some of this unknown, unexplained aspects of Maryland. I'm in Maryland, in Mexico. Maybe one day Maryland Unexplained as well. But anyway, thank you so much for being on Garden of Doom. Is there anything else? Tell people your books also.
The books, Mexico Unexplained, that was published in 2017, and then a follow-up book, Mexican Monsters, dealing with the cryptids. And I have, as a companion to that book, I have a coloring book that has all the monsters, and it's good for adults or children. So it's rated G, so you can give it to your 5-year-old. So, and then I have, in the next few months, I have another book coming out called Mexican Miracles. And I talk about the saints, shrines, and virgins of Mexico. So,
excellent.
I have all of that stuff out there.
You touch on Santorini?
Santeria?
Santeria, sorry, yeah. Not the island, yeah.
Yeah, where Atlantis was supposedly, right?
Yeah, one of the places, sure.
Yeah, one of the theories. Santeria is more of a Caribbean thing. And there is some of it in Mexico, and some of it does overlap a little bit. I don't get into it that much, but yeah, there is some overlap there.
All right, very cool. Well, thank you for your insights. Yes, you're absolutely invited on the show again. We'll figure it out. We'll be in touch. And I thank you for your time. Thank you so much for your expertise. And this has been a lot of fun.
Thank you, Jeff.
And folks, thank you for listening. Please give us a rating, a 5-star rating, a review, and more importantly, anything else. Shows like mine, and probably like Robert's as well, we rely on referrals more than anything else. So please, referrals, especially those of us who we don't fit into just one genre. We cover a bunch of things. So it's really cool when you become our referrals, because that's the best thing. Anyway, thank you for listening to Garden of Doom, and you'll check us out again next week.